Well, welcome to European Journeys. I'm back in the office after a few weeks of traveling across Europe, and you may have seen some of the videos that I shot during that trip. And if you haven't, I invite you to go to my YouTube channel, European Journeys, and look for the series Summer Shorts, where you'll be able to watch those short videos. So we're back here in the office, and we're in fact resuming the series that we left half done before the summer. That is the series called Walloons that Changed the World. Now, these Walloons were people who lived between the 16th and the 17th century, and they had adopted the Reformed faith, and for that they most of the time had to flee the lands where they came from. They came from what is today southern Belgium and the north of France. In fact, the south of Belgium today is still called Wallonia. And so they had to resettle in lands where they would be able to worship freely. At the time, the Counter-Reformation was raging in those lands, motivated highly by both the Emperor and the Roman Catholic Church. So for this sixth stage of this series, we are going to visit a small village near Brussels, which is spelled Ohain. Now, if you don't speak French, that might be difficult to pronounce. So here it is. It is named Ohain. Ohain is the name of the village. It's a rather rich area in the Laan municipality, and not so far from the center of the village, just a kilometer or so from the center of the village, we find a residential area that was built in recent decades, and there we find the street name which is in fact the only one that can be found in Belgium, such a street name, and that street name is Avenue Pierre Minuit. It is just next to another street named Avenue de Manhattan, famous place in New York, obviously, and in fact Pierre Minuit and Manhattan are closely linked to one another. Now, quite amazingly, under the plate Avenue Pierre Minuit, we find another sign which explains who would be Pierre Minuit. And in fact, it says that Pierre Minuit was a fictitious character created in the 20th century by a local author. Now, that's really not true. That's absolutely not true. Pierre Minuit was not a fictitious character. In fact, he really lived in the 16th century. He was born towards the end of the 16th century. And he's so important that, in fact, he's one of the major figures behind the building of what would become the United States of America. So let's try to recover the history of this man and in fact, correct this gross mistake of having made him a fictitious character. So, in fact, Pierre Minuit was born in the year 1580 in Wesel in Germany. Well, that would not make him a Walloon. But in fact, his parents had to flee the land of what is today Belgium before he was born, and so that's why he was born as a foreigner there in Germany. Now, in fact, he might have not originated from Ohain, the place where we find his name, but maybe, most probably, from Tournai. But for a long time, it was believed that he came from Ohain, so that's why we find the name Avenue Pierre Minuit there. And so Pierre Minuit was born there in Wesel. He grew up there. He got married in Germany, and then left Germany to settle in the Netherlands in the 1620s. Now, that's the time in which the first ships were leaving the Netherlands to go to America and to that new colony called the New Netherlands. And Pierre Minuit would quickly sign up also to be one of those who would go there. But he would sign up as a businessman and not just as a mere settler. Now, I forgot to say, but Pierre Minuit obviously was raised in a Reformed family, which was practicing the Reformed faith, and that would have a high influence on him. In fact, he would remain a believer, a faithful believer, all his life himself, and that would have an impact on his dealings. And so Pierre Minuit became so much, he got such great confidence from the Dutch estates that he was finally appointed the governor of the colony of the New Netherlands. Now, at the time, the New Netherlands was basically made of a few villages very far away from one another along the Hudson River. And Pierre Minuit found that that could become a problem because these villages were too far from one another and most probably unable to defend each other in case of attack. Pierre Minuit needed to find a place where the colony could be handled and where a fortification could be built. And so he would look around there and finally realized that the island called Manhattan was the best place where such a central government could be established and such a fortification could be built. The island was good also for agriculture, which was very important at the time, obviously. And so Pierre Minuit wanted to get that island. But that's where his faith came into play, because up until then, usually Europeans would deal with those they called Indians, that is, the people who were there before them, as inferior beings, and more often than not, they would seize their lands. That for Pierre Minuit was not acceptable, and he would not do that. He knew that these people were made in the image of God, and knowing that, he needed to deal with them accordingly, as equals. Now, how do you deal as equals with people from whom you would like to get land? Well, through trade, by buying the land. And this is what he would do with the island of Manhattan. Now, in the 19th century, a historian calculated that the price he paid was the equivalent of $24, which was obviously a bargain. But nevertheless, he was really one of the first to deal with these people, these locals, through trade and not by force. And he would gain their confidence, obviously. And that would lead him even to be able to buy a second island, which became known as Staten Island. Now, his way of dealing with the Indians might have upset the people of the Dutch West India Company, which was controlling the area. They were there for trade, to make money, and their interest might have probably been hampered by the way Pierre Minuit was dealing with the colony. And so at some point the conflict went so far that finally Pierre Minuit was evicted from his position. So he went back to Europe rather saddened by this decision. But the King of Sweden, Gustavus Adolphus, took notice of him, and the King of Sweden wanted a colony in America as well. So he called him to Sweden, asked him if he would lead an expedition there in order to establish a colony for Sweden. This is what he did. He went on board of the Kalmar Nyckel and arrived in the 1630s, 1637 exactly. He arrived along the Delaware River and settled near what is today Wilmington, for those who know the area of Delaware. There he planted this new Sweden colony, and he would stay there. He stayed there, in fact, just about 1 year. In May 1638, he left and went to the Caribbean along with a ship, but a hurricane arose there in the Caribbean and, in fact, took the life of Pierre Minuit. The boat was lost, and Pierre Minuit sank together with the ship. That's how the life of Pierre Minuit ended. Now, a few words again about his faith. In fact, his Reformed faith led him to order the construction of the first church building of what became New Amsterdam, which would become later New York, obviously. So he was the first to order the planning of a church building there. But his vision for that place was rather new at the time and would stay and stayed in the DNA of the city of New Amsterdam, later called New York. In fact, what he wanted was a place where people would enjoy civil and religious freedoms. Now, we can see his life experience there. His parents came from Belgium, where they were persecuted for their faith. They had to flee in order to be free to worship the Lord according to their faith. And that obviously must have had an influence on his life. And so when he arrived there, he wanted a place where people would be would have civil and religious freedoms. And that has remained up until today. So as you see, Pierre Minuit is not a fictitious character at all. I hope the Lan municipality will correct that gross mistake. Yes, indeed, Pierre Minuit was a real figure, a person that really has had a high impact, a strong impact on what is today the United States of America. I'm Cedric Placentino. See you next time for another stage of European Journeys.